And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julie Baird, and I work for First American Exchange Company, and I'm the current president of the FEA. I want to welcome you all to our webinar today entitled The American Families Plan and Impact on 1031 and Key Findings of the Ling, Petrova, and Ernst & Young studies. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll have two presenters today who will talk and share their PowerPoint presentations for the first 40 or 45 minutes, and then we'll take some questions in the last 10 or 15 minutes. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. As Lynn mentioned, this webinar is being recorded and it will be loaded onto the FEA website by tomorrow. We are not providing CES credit for this webinar. I want to start by thanking our two presenters today, Dave Franasiak, who's an attorney with Williams Jensen and our FEA lobbyist, and Suzanne Goldstein Baker, Executive Vice President and General Counsel with IPX and co-chair of the FEA's Government Affairs Committee. Thank you both, and without further ado, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Unmute, Dave.
Dave.
Hi, everybody. I'm off of mute. Dave Franasiak here. You know who I am. I've represented FEA and predecessors of the FEA and the like-kind exchange community since Bill Clinton first decided to try to revise Section 1031. So it's been a few years. Every year this changes a little bit. And as probably all of you know, we've been very, very active for the last, well, since 2017 and prior to 2017. Why don't we do the first slide? And just to refresh everyone's recollection, recall that in 2017, we ended up with a Republican House, Senate, and President, and we ended up with losing the personal property. And the reason for that being that the Republicans that were in were sort of loving the corporate community to death. And one thing they did was institute immediate expensing, which is very expensive. They did not expand it to buildings, but the personal property, a lot of that was covered. And a lot of people who did personal property and owned personal property felt that that wasn't necessarily a bad trade-off. There are other people that, of course, did FCC spectrum and they got a lower corporate rate. So there are trade-offs. We know where we are now. We have another triple play. We've got a president who has been extraordinarily active and aggressive since sworn in. He's issued a record number of executive orders. And I must say that everything that he said in the campaign that he would do or initiate, he's done. And you may agree with those policies or disagree with the policies. He did mention 1031 being an area that would be either reduced or capped. The story sort of changed as time went on. But indeed, here we find ourselves with now the, Biden's American Families Plan. And he's got a companion piece of legislation, American Jobs Plan, which deals with infrastructure and corporate tax changes. The American Families Plan on the tax side deals with individual tax changes. The individual tax changes, you got the individual rates, and then you've got capital gains increase, which will be equivalent for people over $1 million, making over $1 million, and that will go up. They'll get rid of the differentials, so it'll be at the top personal rate. And then they took a bunch of swings at other capital gains related issues. One of them being, of course, the step up in basis, which everyone in this call is most likely very familiar with. Took, in my view, a rather draconian approach on that. I think $1 million is not a lot in this day and age. And I might also add $500,000 is definitely not a lot in this day and age. But they did that on step up in basis, which of course is a capital gains type provision. The other is carried interest, which is another capital gains type provision. And we got picked up as the additional capital gains provision. We raised a lot less money than some of the others, save for carried interest. And the words, I want to read the words again, just so, everybody reads the news and they read this and they read that. This is all we have, folks. The president would also end the special real estate tax break that allows investors to defer taxation when they exchange property for gains greater than $500,000. I mean, this cap, we believe, will effectively kill 1031 and will essentially end up having a tremendously negative consequence for commercial real estate. I think everyone on this call realizes that. I'm not so sure that people that propose this realize that, and at least in the administration. We've spent an incredible amount of time with Hill Democrats since the end of 2019, when it became clear that there was a real possibility of a sweep. At least I thought there was a real possibility. And my job for you all is to protect your downside. And the downside is whenever the one party owns all three levers of power, we're in trouble. We were in trouble with the Republicans and we're in trouble with the Democrats for different reasons. You know, the words are used like loophole, but in reality, I think in this case, it was we're enjoyed by wealthy people. We're part of the let's tax the wealthy. With the Republicans, it was, well, I mean, expensing's a bit more of a stronger and better incentive. That was their argument. So different rationale. Again, when you, like I had mentioned, the cap will effectively kill Section 1031. And we don't have any details beyond these words. And we have an unclear effective date. We don't know when this effect is effective. We do know from research that there have been other years where similar tax increases, not necessarily 1031, but just take this whole batch of the Americans Family Act and the American Jobs Act, which is a total of $4 or $5 trillion, the whole package of spending and the tax piece of it. Provisions in prior bills have been made retroactive to the beginning of the year. So that is not out of the question. I'm not suggesting that's the result and where we'll end up, but it certainly is a possibility. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, we don't know in this language what the definition of gain is, over what period of time, and who it applies to, whether it's an individual versus a partnership entity, versus parties to the exchange. How does it affect people that aren't affected by this numerical limit, whatever it might be? And we just simply don't know. And again, when you look at the immediate impact on commercial real estate when combined with the proposed capital gains increase, and certainly for family businesses, the step up in basis will be devastating. And of course, you know, one of the arguments that we've had with 1031, and we've been addressing this all along with our other points we've been addressing, is people use capital, they use like-kind exchanges again and again and again, and they die and they get a step up in basis. Well, if the Biden American Families Plan was enacted without any changes, which I think is highly unlikely, but if it were, that would eliminate that argument for sure. In any event, we don't think that that will necessarily apply because we think that this bill is before the House and the Senate. We've talked to a great number of Democrats on the tax writing committees. And we also have dealt with the Senate Finance Committee, Ways and Means Committee members, and with leadership. We've also had plenty of fundraising Zooms and other direct communications with friends of Biden who are Democrats. And we believe that we have a pretty good cadre of folks on the Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee, and within elements of the House and Senate leadership to be able to blunt this. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Your clients, I'm sure, are calling you saying, hey, you know, what's going to go on with the timing on this? What's the outlook? I can tell you my view of the outlook of this is we're going to get this knocked out of this package. That's my goal, and I think we'll succeed. And we're going to succeed because we have a tremendous coalition, which I'll get into a little bit later. But they're going to also ask you, what's the timing? And here's the timing I'm working off of. And that is, I listened to what Joe Biden says, because so far Joe Biden has done what he said he's going to do on virtually every issue. I also listened to Nancy Pelosi. Speaker Pelosi has an ability to get through incredible amounts of legislation, even with very thin margins. And we know that she's got only a 3-vote swing right now. And the Senate is 50-50 with Kamala Harris being the tiebreaker. However, I believe that these Democrats, like the Republicans in 2017, believe they have a window of opportunity, and they are going to push this through very, very quickly, and they're going to push very hard. Nancy Pelosi said she wants it passed the House by July 4th, on theory that that gives the Senate a few weeks before the August recess to complete their actions. I think the reality is if the Senate doesn't complete it by the end of July or the beginning of August, that since this is the most important initiative for the Democrats, they will keep Congress in August and push right through August into September. But in any event, we believe that these bills will end up being done by budget reconciliation. There is very little likelihood that there will be anything bipartisan. I think the tone has not been good on either side, but certainly it hasn't gotten any warmer in the last month or two. And I think you're going to be seeing, there was supposed to be negotiations this week, but nothing really. Republicans in the Senate have a $600 billion no tax infrastructure bill. Sounds like a lot of money, 600 billion, but in today's vernacular, it's peanuts. We're talking trillions. And so that's probably going to go nowhere because it's not big enough and it doesn't have taxes. And then there'll be a meeting with the Republican leadership and others in the White House next week. And we'll have McCarthy and we'll have Schumer and we'll have Mitch McConnell. And frankly, I think that's probably the end of it. I think then they begin to go, Democrats will go totally partisan. And they're going to use the budget reconciliation route because that's the easiest way to get this passed. That's what they did in 2017, recall. Again, you only need 51 votes, and they've got 51 votes if they can keep Manchin in line, Sinema, and a few other members. I think the chance of them doing that is a better than 50-50, probably 60-40%, if not higher, that they're going to be able to do that in the Senate. And I think in the House, Nancy Pelosi hasn't failed yet. So I'm betting the House on that one in terms of her ability to get through even with a 3-vote margin. So what we have to do is knock this thing out, knock it out in the House and move quickly. And so again, that's our goal. That's what we're doing. We're making all of these contacts, both us, the FEA, and our 1031 Real Estate Coalition, which includes the alphabet soup of every real estate association you can think of, plus the Farm Bureau and every ag association you can think of, plus associations that are concerned with conservation easements, all 31 of them. And we're united, we're meeting constantly, we're coordinating. Next slide. As I mentioned, they only need 51 votes in the Senate. And again, as I mentioned, this is the procedure that was used in 2017. It's been used in the past as well. And I think that, we're going to have a reasonable chance of getting this knocked out in the House. We have generated grassroots. We've activated the grassroots at the FEA. Julie can talk about this, or Dave Brown. And they've generated about 8,000 direct letters to the Hill. Other companies, activist companies in the FEA umbrella, title companies and others, have generated an additional 30,000 contacts. We have over 31,000 Hill contacts already. I feel companies inside the FEA have also reached out to their networks and their collective networks of 660,000 people to get them to write to Congress. So we're doing that. We're also in a primary beginning the so-called grass tops effort, whereby the FEA is engaged a firm I'm working very closely with, and so is the FEA, to generate articles across the country with regards to the importance of preserving 1031 for all the very good reasons that we stated over the years. And we're going to have those placed in key districts, the key districts being the districts and states where these Democrats reside that are going to be pivotal. And we're targeting folks that are Democrats who are essentially on our side, but we want them to know that there are people back home, people in their local communities that really care about this. So it reinforces what they would probably do instinctively, which would be help us keep this out of the mix. We're continuing our efforts with key staff and key members. I've talked to, I don't know, five of them so far this week. One of the examples I guess I can give you is we know next Wednesday there's going to be a hearing, and the hearing's entitled I got to read the title here because it's really a title. It's a Ways and Means Subcommittee hearing called Funding Our Nation's Priorities, Reforming the Tax Codes, Advantageous Treatment of the Wealthy. Some of the firms here in town began to whip up, oh, this is going to include all the stuff in the Jobs in the Families Act, which is with you, everything I said, all the capital gains provisions, individual tax increase. And the chairman of that committee is Mike Thompson. Mike Thompson is a big supporter of Section 1031. As a matter of fact, on that subcommittee, we have 4 really good supporters of 1031. I'm talking to all their offices. And indeed, even though this title is a bit scary, this hearing was put together before the Biden tax plan, this particular version of it, the families plan, was announced. So this hearing wasn't designed to go after 1031. It's really more aimed at step up in basis and capital gains, most likely, and maybe the individual rate, and maybe even carried interest. But we know, having been in this battlefield for a number of years, that the liberal think tanks and the progressive think tanks that don't like 1031, and they're the ones that are feeding CNBC and all of these other folks with bad information continually that we continually fight back on, are going to be out there sending packages to folks on that committee saying, oh, 1031 will be the usual litany. Donald Trump did it. It's only rich people. It's really just a farm thing, and the like. This limit of $500,000 is below what was in Obama's Treasury package, which was $1 million. I mean, so they've gone backwards over 6 years. And then we're also bringing that up. But a lot of this is like, okay, what cap would you like? And our answer is caps don't work. We don't want caps. So that is our view, and we're going to stick to it. So next slide. What can you do? We built a vibrant defense, and we are focusing again on House and Senate leaders, et cetera. Next slide. We need you to get involved writing letters and calling your Congress people. We need you to contact members of Congress, whether you know them or not, whether you're your congressman or others. We need you to participate in the fundraisers. Consider the FEA PAC. Consider writing personal checks to some of these events that we're doing. They're very, very, very focused. They're very rich with content, and they're very impactful. We're also doing Zoom meetings with congressional staff. Some of you have been involved in those. We're going to continue to have those. We're going to build those hearings as time moves on and we go through into, until this is resolved, both the House and the Senate. Reach out to your friends and tell them they need to get involved. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne Baker to talk to you about 2 very key studies, which are important factors in persuading folks to preserve Section 1031.
Thanks, Dave. So just to put a bow on Dave's comments, make a lot of noise. It's important. When you send your e-blasts out, direct people to the Contact Congress pages, www.1031taxreform.com is a website owned by the FEA that's got all the white papers on it. It's got a lot of information. It's a great repository, and it has a very easy facility for sending letters to Congress. It takes just a couple minutes. Some of us have done the same with our websites. As you know, I'm with IPX 1031. We've got it on our website. I think some of the other members do as well. So, reach out and touch someone. It's really important. In the last go round, we were told by multiple members of Congress that on the tax writing committees that the one section they heard most about was 1031. And we need to do that again because our goal is to not be in the bill, to end up on the cutting room floor in terms of proposals. So that's where we're at with that. So economic impact studies. Back in 2015, FEA participated with other members of our 1031 coalition, other associations, to underwrite 2 groundbreaking economic impact studies, both of which now have been updated. The first by professors David Ling and Milena Petrova, updated last fall, is a microeconomic impact study focused on commercial real estate. The second study by Ernst & Young is, the ink is still drying, just released, and it is a macroeconomic impact study focused on both the direct and indirect economic activity that's generated by 1031 exchanges. And its principal author is Bob Carroll, who was the former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Tax Analysis at Treasury for quite a number of years. So these authors are well-known, well-respected economists, and they're helpful to us because their data is quantifiable, it's verifiable, they're peer-reviewed. It's not simply anecdotal stories that we're coming in and talking about, which could be perceived as self-serving. So, so please, next slide, please. So, major findings from Ling and Petrova, which they actually started out focused on the taxpayer. This study focused on what's the net present value of doing a 1031 exchange to the taxpayer. And from there, they bubbled on out to the greater economy. Ernst & Young kind of took the opposite position of starting from the overall economy and then coming down to what's the impact on people. So, so it's really good because they dovetail nicely and they started from different directions, and where they ended up was with a lot of really good data for us. So Ling and Petrova, the first time around, studied 1.6 million transactions over, I think, a 17 or 18 year period, maybe 14. Now they have gone back, and this study focused on 2010 to 2020, which is really good because there's a lot of data that is that is outside of the Great Recession, so not impacted by that. They concluded that 10 to 20% of all commercial real estate transactions are 1031 exchanges. I'm going to go through all of this, and then I'm going to give Dave Brown a chance to kind of compare some of these findings to some other studies that are focused purely on the ag community or in ag transactions. They found, just as they did the first time around, that exchanges preserve capital and encourage capital improvements that create jobs that add to state and local tax bases. They found once again that 1031 buyers invest significantly more capital into replacement properties than do non-1031 buyers. Now, some of you who have studied the statistics from the old study might know that this is a different percentage. It's 15.4%. I think the first study was around a third. This is still a big number. So it's important. The note about greater investment. They further found, again, that 1031 exchanges result in greater equity ownership and lower leverage, lower debt, but in the replacement properties, in 1031 properties. And in fact, they found that there's approximately a 30% loan to value ratio for 1031 buyers versus a 43% loan to value ratio in properties owned by non-1031 buyers. That's really important systemically because that greater equity, lower leverage results in a reduced credit risk, not only for the investors, but also for the lenders and system-wide. We don't have the issue with, we have less speculative bubbles there with, over-leveraged properties. They can withstand a little drop in values without being underwater. So that's important. 1031 exchanges encourage shorter holding periods for the real estate, and they improve marketability of commercial real estate, which by definition is really an illiquid asset. Next slide, please. Okay, good. There's a lag. It's kind of unnerving. They found some interesting statistics about who's doing exchanges and where. For example, 38% of commercial real estate exchanges involve multifamily housing. That's a big number. And with the focus on affordable housing, workforce housing, that's really important. You take 1031s away, and that raises the cost of capital for apartment owners who then will have to raise rents. So, you know, that's a significant number. Nationally, they found that half of all exchanges were valued above $575,000. Now, they got to this in a couple of different ways. They looked at CoStar data, and then they were concerned that, you know, CoStar data is limited to the kind of the old saw of garbage in, garbage out, that, you know, there's only enough 1031 data to the extent that the transaction and its involvement in a 1031 is reported. And they felt that it was underreported. So we at IPX 1031 provided the professors with data relating to the last 10 years of properties for exchanges that we've facilitated. So we sent them a data dump of something like 250,000 properties, which they sliced and diced and sorted however they needed to. And so they were able to come up with, you know, kind of validate the data they had from other sources. And so that's where they came up with the 575,000 number. Note that is not an average number. It's simply half above, half below. They further determined that the overwhelming majority of 1031s are one-time events, that less than 20% of replacement properties are disposed of in a subsequent exchange. Most of the time, these taxpayers are one and done, so that replacement property is disposed of at a taxable sale, which goes right to that myth of swap till you drop, that, yeah, some people do, most people don't. Also, to the extent that properties are held in business entities, which are not disregarded, so there are partnerships, corporations, you know, those entities can't die and take the gain with them. They found that elimination of Section 1031 would cause a decrease in transactional activity, a decrease in capital investment, and a drop in real estate fair market values of about 6%. They further found that elimination of 1031 would cause an increase in holding period. People would hang on to their properties, feeling locked in by the tax effect. It would increase the cost of capital, would increase the amount of debt on the property, and all of those things would result in the owners having to increase rents to tenants by another 6%. So bad, bad, bad. They further found in looking through, you know, net present value to the taxpayer, they concluded that 63% of the tax deferral is actually recovered by the Treasury through the impact of reduced depreciation deductions. Some of you may not be as familiar with how depreciation is impacted by 1031, but for every dollar of gain that is not recognized and rolled over into the replacement property, there's an equal dollar of depreciation that's foregone, because you cannot depreciate the same dollar twice. And if you have lower depreciation deductions, then incrementally you have higher income, resulting in higher income taxes. So, you know, that's a really important finding. Finally, they concluded that the Joint Committee on Taxation's tax expenditure number for 1031 is greatly overstated. Next slide, please. here we have the Ernst & Young Macroeconomic Impact Study. This was really interesting, really important, because they looked not only at the direct impact on the taxpayer, but they look at the broad overall impact at 3 levels. 1, the exchanging taxpayer. Okay, that's real easy. That's the individuals that own the 2 flats and the rental units, the farmers, as well as all the business entities. Then they looked at the supplier businesses. Well, who are they? Okay, well, they are all the businesses and services and individuals that earn taxable income and generate revenue because of the transaction. So they are supplying goods and services to the taxpayers. So that's qualified intermediaries, real estate brokers, lawyers, accountants, title insurers, escrow closers, surveyors, appraisers, lenders, building material suppliers, and on and on and on. Okay, then the 3rd level is related consumer spending. Okay, so who are they? Well, they are all those employees of suppliers and employees of the taxpayers who now have earned income because of this. So the real estate broker gets a commission. What's the real estate broker going to do with his commission? Where does that end up in the economy? Well, the broker's going to the grocery store, taking the kids to IHOP for pancakes, taking the family on vacation, paying rent. So they look at all of that, and the reality that if the transaction of the exchange, that catalyst for all this activity goes away, well, so does all the rest of the activity. So Ernst & Young found that exchanges reduce the cost of capital. They increase investment in the US economy. They generate jobs, lots of them, labor income, and value added in the economy. They remove the lock-in effect so that you can make a good business decision instead of being hampered by what might be a bad tax decision. They promote the highest and best use of property. And they encourage more efficient deployment of capital within the economy and more efficient business growth. Next slide, please. They based their study on 1 year. They took 2021 to come up with their estimates. However, to the extent that 2021's activity is similar to other years, which I would submit that it is, then you can really look at these findings as annual, at these numbers. So this is huge. They found that in 1031, exchanges will support creation of 568,000 jobs, $27.5 billion of labor income, and ultimately $55.3 billion of value added to the US GDP. Now that's just huge. Now, in looking at Ling and Petrova's findings, Ling and Petrova estimated or opined that they felt that exchange activity was underreported and underestimated. So that, remember, they came up to 10 to 20%. So, EY studies are on kind of the verifiable metrics, but they recognize that Ling and Petrova, made some really good points. And so they recalculated these numbers as if 1031 exchanges represented 10% of all real estate transactions. And if that were the case, then those numbers grow. Then 1031 would be creating 710,000 jobs, 34.4 billion of labor income, and almost $70 billion of value added to the US economy. So, those are, again, just incredible numbers and really helpful to our cause. Okay, next slide, please. So another thing they looked at is how much do 1031 exchanges contribute to federal, state, and local tax revenue? We know what the tax cost is because that's Joint Committee comes out and Treasury comes out and they come up with a tax score. And so those who would do away with 1031 believe that the government is losing out by this tax deferral. So Ernst & Young took a look at, well, how much additional taxes is being raised at the federal, state, and local level because of 1031 exchanges. And they concluded that it's $7.8 billion a year in tax. That includes $5 billion at the federal level and $2.8 billion at the state and local level. Again, that's really important because I think the score is around $9 billion for the tax cost. So look here, this is just short of that in additional tax. And on top of that, we've talked before about the impact of foregone depreciation. Ernst & Young concluded that roughly $6 billion per year is paid by taxpayers doing exchanges in additional income taxes due to reduced deductions because of foregone depreciation on their replacement property. So, once again, these are great findings that are really good tools for us to be able to rebut some of these myths. And I will say that in terms of money well spent, this is money well spent for both of these studies, back in 2015 and again now, the funding that FEA and the other participating organizations placed on underwriting these studies is really, really helpful and an important part of our total strategy that Dave has laid out before. And now, before we go to questions, I want to turn over to Dave Brown. And Dave, why don't you go through some of the farmland statistics and how they dovetail with all of this? Thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you, Suzanne. I'll try to make it brief, but we don't have any formal studies on ag, but what we've seen from our statistics is that they dovetail what the Ling and Petrova study stated, that anywhere from 10 to 20% of ag transactions involve a 1031 exchange. And we looked at our farm transactions, which total billions of dollars of value over a period, and 70% are farms. A $500,000 limit for farms would be devastating. We have highly appreciated farmland that has been going on for years now, and farmers are they're doing well when commodity prices are high, which is pretty much this year. But generally speaking, they're not getting rich off the land. 3% return is what they shoot for. And so not only from a commercial and a residential perspective, but also from a farm perspective, it would be disastrous if it did go away. And talking about what you all's members can do, where we've been effective is by mobilizing the opinion leaders that we deal with, and everybody on this call has access to different groups of regional opinion leaders. So when we mobilized during the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, what we did is we mobilized these opinion leaders, the accountants, the realtors, the attorneys, the folks that you work with. And so then they influence others. I mean, you're connecting with the influencers who can influence others. So, in terms of what you can do, the tools are available for you on 1031taxreform.com. The FEA put together the blast with the information that you can repackage for your own purposes for a newsletter alert. And you can do your own call to action. You can do webinars. You can take these slides. This information is for you to go out and spread the word. And what Dave said is, instead of, you need to be activist companies. I mean, everybody needs to be an activist company. And if you're not going to have a company. So it really comes down to your livelihood, and to the extent you've sat on the sidelines before, you haven't participated, now's the time. Otherwise, we've got bigger problems. The last thing I'd leave you with is, we have been very active legislatively. And interestingly, just last night, I ended up speaking with our congressional representative, Cindy Axne, and it was a fortuitous call. And I had 15-minute conversation with her, and she's not on House Ways and Means, but she's a Democrat, and she works in a farm state. And after the 15-minute phone conversation I had with her, my sense is she is ready to go speak to Ways and Means members. She mentioned Mike Thompson, who Dave said is an ally of ours, and others that she would be willing to go speak with. After having this understanding and this discussion with me, and telling her that, 1031, if you take it away, farmers are tax locked. They can't improve their operations. They can't move closer to home. They lose capital when they're looking to upgrade. And beyond that, when you take stepped up basis away, if that were to occur, 1031 becomes indispensable to the point of where, farmers and ag lose, big time. And so, what Dave said is all the farm associations and ag have universally supported Section 1031 exchanges. We also see conservation, 1031 used for conservation. So we have the USDA acquiring permanent conservation easements to take environmentally sensitive acres out of production, so that we have the reduction of nutrients going into the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. And they do that across the country in coastal areas. There are, forest reserve, there's grasslands reserve. You all see these types of transactions. So it's not just the commercial end of it, it's also the ag and the conservation that impacts members, especially the Democratic members. So when you're out there and you're speaking to, your contacts, and you need to be reaching out to your staff, to your congressional staff folks, and also your congresspersons, and specifically the Democrats, using my example, Cindy Axne, who's going to go speak and influence Ways and Means members. That's what needs to happen. That's what you need to do. We need you to open your pocketbook. We need your participation. The consequences if you don't are not good. So that's what I have to add. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave, Suzanne, and Dave. Great information and presentation. We have had a couple questions come up. So if the panelists are ready, I thought I would just start shooting them out. Okay, I'm seeing some head nods. Great. So Dave, first one for you, Dave F. Can you give us a quick primer on the budget reconciliation process? How many times can that be utilized, and are there limits on the number of bills that can be passed through that process? Oh, you're on mute.
There are limits. They've used, they can use the one that they just used, they can use that again. And there's a negotiation with the parliamentarian in the Senate to allow you and sanction that you can do two. So they've got budget reconciliation room here to get this done. Part of the reason why they want to have it done is because that will expire, then they have to go through a whole new budget resolution and a whole new process to create a budget reconciliation vehicle post October 1, which is the fiscal year. So they want to get in this fiscal year that second budget reconciliation bill done. Technically, they can do three, but they've never done three. The third one is supposed to be for debt ceiling. You're into the geeks of geekdom on this one, though, in terms of the rules and how they work. And again, if you look at this huge infrastructure bill, it's got all sorts of stuff in there. It's got green energy, it's got electric vehicles and stations and all kinds of stuff. A lot of that stuff may not make it through the so-called Byrd rule in the Senate, which basically says you can use budget reconciliation if it raises revenue or loses revenue, but not if you do something like you change the CO2 limit. It doesn't work for that kind of stuff. Next. I hope that answered the question.
I think it did. One follow-up. Are there multiple bills that can get into one budget reconciliation process, or?
The talk now is they could do two more budget reconciliation bills because of this parliamentarian decision. and then they would do one with infrastructure in the corporate capital gains, and the other with the American Families Act, and we technically might be in that along with these other individual increases. The problem is that now you're getting a lot of tension on the Hill with both the moderates in the party and the conservatives, the progressives and the moderates. And the moderates are like, you're going to make us take 2 bad votes or 2 really difficult votes. And the progressives are, if we don't have taxing the rich in the first one, don't tell us to wait for the second one. So I think that tends towards doing it all in one bill right now. Could change. We'll see. But yes, they could do 2.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Next question, I'll just throw it out to the whole panel to get your opinions on it. Relating to step up in basis,
Yeah.
how do you see eliminating the step up in basis impacting the 1031 business?
Yeah, I'll do a quick one on that. And that is, it's really driven more by the capital gains rate increase. The way that the Joint Committee algorithm works for revenue estimation, if you get above 27 or 28% on capital gains, you lose revenue. The way you gain more revenue above 27%, you can gain a lot more revenue if you get rid of step up in basis. So it's really a relationship with the capital gains rate. We get thrown in to the extent that we got, the old, swap till you drop accusation that we've answered through Ling Petrova. I hope that was helpful, but it's really more of a link between the capital gains rate and the step up in basis. If you don't do step up in basis, you can't raise a lot of revenue above 27% on capital gains.
Is it worth kind of using the step up in basis as a sacrificial lamb in order to retain 1031, or do you see that as not?
I hope we don't have to get down to that, and I don't think we necessarily will. You certainly have a broad-based coalition of real estate associations that are in favor of preserving 1031 and it's top of their list, but they also have some carried interest concerns. And I think a lot of them have members that would be really creamed with the step up in basis above $1 million. I just think it's very dangerous to do that. And frankly, I think that's going to have a tough time passing, even no matter what we say. It's going to have a tough time passing. And it's huge. Dollar-wise, it dwarfs us in terms of revenue. I mean, it's much huger. It's huge. We're only 41 billion over 5 years with a joint committee. Step up in basis, if you have a higher capital gains rate, it's huge. It's in the almost hundreds of billions, rather.
One thing I would add to Dave's comments is that step up in basis is really a tax on everyone. It's not, even though, they're talking above, $1 million and whatever, but if you get rid of step up in basis, that impacts just so many more people. I think personally, I wish they would just lower the estate tax exemption. I think they could solve a lot of problems by lowering the estate tax exemption and then leave step up basis alone, because anybody who's ever had to go through paperwork of a deceased client, a deceased loved one, to figure out what the basis is, knows what an incredible nightmare that is and how it is the antithesis of tax simplification.
Thanks, Suzanne.
I agree with all of that.
Okay, next question relates to, if we are successful now and 1031s get eliminated from this current proposal, is there a chance that it might get revived again if there's a potential student loan forgiveness bill in the future?
We can always be a pay for, but I think the harder we fight out of the box, where we've got a lot of Democratic member support and education that we've done, the better off we're going to be. Because I think if there's a real dogfight and we get knocked out, they're not going to necessarily want to climb that hill again anytime soon, but you never know. The other is, there's a lot of talk about not paying for a lot of this stuff in the bill. Under the modern monetary theory concept, government expenditures are equal to private expenditures in terms of impact on the economy. So there is still talk that maybe all of his taxes that have to be raised maybe don't have to be raised. Although Biden most recently said that while he's willing to give a little bit on the corporate rate, he wants it between 25 and 28. He still wants everything, quote, paid for. You got people that are like Jason Furman, who's sort of moderate, he's not a progressive radical, said, you know, we're still in the middle of this pandemic and, you know, we can finance this over a period of time. But Biden seems to have taken the notion that it should be paid for. I think that fits conveniently into the progressive narrative that the rich simply don't pay enough. And now's a chance to tax them.
Yeah. On that same note, and I don't think we know the answer to this, but we do have a question relating to the correlation with Biden's statement that he would not increase taxes on anyone earning income under 400,000. Do we have any information about how that 400,000 threshold might play into the $500,000 cap under 1031?
It's a really good question. I don't have the faintest idea. It could be 18 different ways or 8 different ways. I don't think you want the $500,000 piece to hold. We don't want a cap, but you know, I think it's very difficult. He had, of course, he being Biden, suggested originally that he was going to repeal 1031. Then he said, I'm only going to repeal it for people, or he had said, his staff said, I'm only going to repeal it for people that earn over 400,000. And that those words couldn't be modeled by the modelers. It couldn't be modeled by the experts at the Brookings Institute. And they had long conversations with the staff, and they simply didn't have the data to disaggregate it to see what the revenue impact would be. These are very difficult concepts. I mean, it's much easier if it's related to a rate. If you relate it to something like, you know, a deferral exchange, it's just very difficult. And what do those words mean? I mean, is it per individual? Is it per partnership? Is it per corporation? Is it, if one person fails in an exchange, does it blow up the exchange? You know, there's some holdings in 1031 jurisprudence that suggest if, you know, if one of the exchangers is disqualified, maybe the whole thing's disqualified. I don't know. You guys are smarter than I am on that, but it raises an issue, at least in my mind. Hence, I think caps end up actually working to repeal 1031, and they're just a disguise to make it look more, you know, small guy friendly.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Do you have any thoughts, Dave, about how the midterm elections may impact our industry? You think it might work to our advantage?
Well, look, we've got a 3-vote swing in the House. It's 50-50 in the Senate. And in this kind of a setup, in this piece of the political cycle, usually if there's a party that controls all 3 levers, they inevitably lose seats in the next election. That would be 2022. So the House is the closest to flipping. The Senate would be a dogfight to flip. Wouldn't bet that that's going to happen just yet. The House got a much better chance, but you got a big problem here, and that is you have a disunified and somewhat scrambled Republican Party. And whether they're able to glide on that natural wave or not, or will they do things that turn people off so that that outcome that looks like it's easy becomes impossible? I don't know. And that's what I don't know. Divided government is better for 1031. Divided government is better for most Americans, frankly. That, anyways, pay taxes, let's put it that way.
Okay, I think we've got time for maybe one more question here before we wrap up. We were talking a little bit about the press and dispelling some of the notions that are in the press about this being a loophole or a tool of the rich, things like that. Do you have a sense as to why that sort of maybe bias is present in the mainstream media about 1031s?
Well, I think it speaks to the overall narrative that's being put out by Biden and the White House, which is we need to tax the wealthy. They're not paying their fair share. Large corporations and wealthy people aren't paying. And so therefore, anything he proposes is put through the screen of it's a corporate ripoff or it's an individual tax loophole. And I think the narrative in the mainstream press is in many instances to reflect what the White House's initiatives are and not be so very critical in some instances. So I think it naturally belies itself. That's where it ends up going. I wouldn't take it personally because it's totally untrue. It's not a loophole. It's only been around for 100 years. And you can tell me these stories about farmers that did it 100 years ago, and we've done the research, and it's just not true. That isn't the history of the provision. So it is what the vernacular is at the moment, and it's what the narrative is. And when reporters writing a story, they want to fit into the narrative.
Yeah,
So,
which just makes it that much more important for these grass top efforts that you mentioned. David,
exactly, right.
And getting the study information out. Suzanne has a great summary of the two studies and how impactful those economic numbers really show and really paint a different picture and a true picture.
And everybody on this call, you have your future in your hands. And one of your hands should be getting on the FEA website or other websites, writing to your congressman, and we're sending some emails to your network saying, get mobilized. We need to be heard.
That's exactly right. So folks are wondering how they can get involved. Join the FEA if you are not already a member. Reach out to your local leaders. We put the tax reform website in the chat box there. Click there. You can find these economic studies. You can find an easy way to contact your congressional leadership. And donate to the PAC, financially contribute to the Zoom fundraisers that we have. There are a number of ways you can get involved. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to myself or to the FEA in general. We'd be happy to provide some guidance. Any last parting words from any of our panelists today?
We're going to win. If you do everything you can do, we're going to win.
Right.
Fantastic.
We did it before. We know how to do it. We can do it again. And we have a really powerful army mobilized among our coalition partners. So, there's a lot of power in truth and in knowledge, and it's just a matter of making enough noise to get the truth out there, because, myths are cheap. Doesn't take any research to just parrot a myth. But, it takes a little effort to look into something that's technical. We've got a lot of collateral out there that's available on 1031taxreform.com. So use it.
Hey, I have a comment. Hi, guys. Well, first, Lewis Rogers asked if we could get a copy of the presentation sent out maybe by PDF to the attendees.
Yes, that will be distributed to the attendees.
Yeah, awesome. So Dave, my concern is that this cap might be attractive to some factions of our coalition. I mean, maybe not attractive, but palatable. Are you worried at all that we might have a carve out proposed for perhaps farmers or other constituents that might take the wind out of our sails?
I mean, there's always that potential, but as far as we know, that opportunity isn't being taken by the farm community, nor is that opportunity being taken by elements within the 1031 family writ large, and it's beyond QIs. Okay.
Good.
And I think they realize we're going to hang separately if we don't hang together on this. And so we got to fight and resist that. And frankly, if we put a big enough push on this, look at it's 41 million. I don't know how much this raises. I have no idea. The 41 million is a complete repeal.
Billion.
Billion, yeah. A billion, trillion, billion used to be a lot, but 41 billion if they repeal it. If they don't repeal it, it's like 30. You're talking about $1 trillion bills here. There will be $6 trillion enacted if Biden's first bill, which already passed, is paired with his next two, American Families and American Jobs Act. $6 trillion. That's 1/3 of the GDP of the US economy. This has never happened before. It didn't happen after World War II. It didn't happen after the Depression. We've never had this before. We are minuscule compared to the other things they're trying to raise, plus the overall scheme of things in the bill. And as many people have said, there's areas in an infrastructure bill like income housing and others where they're trying to help various parts of the real estate industry. They will take it away by repealing 1031. They will take it away to end up being naught. And those are powerful arguments. I know somebody raised the double taxation on step-up basis. That absolutely is. David Fisher did. It absolutely is step up. It actually is a double taxation. Corporate tax is double taxation. I mean, we got lots of double taxation, but it is a good point on step-up basis.
Yeah.
We're deferral, and most of that money ends up getting paid back plus, according to our research and these studies.
Yeah, great. Great last points. And again, thank you to our panelists and to our attendees today. We really appreciate your time. We appreciate your engagement. We need your engagement for sure. I believe we have a slide we're going to put up with some upcoming FEA webinars for your future enjoyment coming up here in the next month or two. And again, thanks everyone for your presentations today and for your time.
Thank you.